Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are at the beginning of free agency in the 2047 to 2048 offseason. And the Pirates are coming off of the best year of our 10-year run as general manager of the team, won 100 games, made it to the World Series for the first time. But as you can see, we did fall to the Red Sox 4-2. So it was a good season on the field, but we've got a lot of work to do this offseason. We are in a bit of a unique situation for this Pirates playthrough, in that as this offseason begins, we actually have some money to spend, which is not a position that we have frequently been in. But you can see we've got about $25 million potentially to bring on free agents. Our budget has increased $10 million this past year to $174 million. You can see we were down at $122 million back in 2039. So the good news is that we have some money to spend. The bad news is that I don't really love the options that are available in free agency. When you think back at what we did in arbitration and what went on in free agency, our ace starting pitcher, Luis Longoria, is a free agent. He was looking for about $26.5 million a year from us for an extension. He's looking for over $30 million a year now. He certainly stands out as one of the top free agent pitchers available. But he's almost 30 years old, and he's fragile physically. We've gotten over 30 games from him each of the last 5 years in his late 20s by managing him on a pitch count. And I just think that it's a wise move to move on from Longoria at this point. Besides him, we've also moved on from longtime starter Bobby Gonzalez, and then closer Jose Calderon, who we brought on for the last couple months of last season. So you can see 3 of the top 10 or so pitchers out there on free agency now are players who were on the Pirates last year. So we have definitely taken a hit to our pitching staff. We will be putting Devin Smith, the youngster who's the number 37 prospect in baseball, into the rotation to fill one of those holes. He was up last year purely as a reliever in the second half of the year, was very good with 42 strikeouts and a 150 ERA and 30 innings pitched. So feel like that's filled one of the holes in our bullpen or in our rotation, but we could definitely use a starter. As far as our position players, I think we've lost less. The only players we had to move on from were Henry Gonzalez, former number one overall pick, and Bobby Guzman, who's been a second baseman and third baseman for us the last several seasons, has kind of finally now moved into a utility role for us and was looking for about $10 million. So we were okay moving on from Guzman. Feel like we've got a built-in replacement with the youngster Jerry Rivera, the 24-year-old, who will get some time in the infield for us next year. And as I mentioned, the kind of more significant potential loss it may have been Henry Gonzalez, who, as I mentioned, was the number 1 overall pick for us, first draft that we did while managing these Pirates. And you can see he won a Rookie of the Year for us, 2-time All-Star, 2-time playoff series MVP. But he had kind of steadily regressed over the course of his 5 years in the majors. And last year was kind of a part-time outfielder for us, starting just 73 games and hitting just 229 with 10 homers and 288 at bats. And you can see, so we traded him to Toronto because his arbitration number was going to be high, ended up being over $11 million, and just didn't think that that was a good investment. But given that he was a fourth or fifth outfielder for us last year, and we've got young outfielders in our system who could get more playing time, notably Joel Fields, Danny Kelez, and then even when we look down in AAA, Jaden Godfrey, who we're actually training to be a super utility guy, but kind of a outfielder by trade, but we think he could be a decent backup third baseman. So I don't feel like we've lost a lot there. But the issue is with the 25-ish million that we have to spend, there's not an obvious big-time bat that I want to spend a good chunk of that money on. And unfortunately, when I look at the pitchers, I didn't want Longoria at $26.5 million. Certainly don't want him at about $33 million. I don't want to spend $17 million on a reliever, Calderon, especially after he had a couple of pretty poor performances for us in the playoffs. So I just don't know, and I don't want to bring Bobby Gonzalez back for around $10 million a year. So I don't know exactly where to go. I am intrigued by the 22-year-old Cuban Manny Renteria. Issue is that we've only got low scouting accuracy on him, and it's going to take 3 weeks to know more about him. And he's looking for about $5 million. But I think that he could be an interesting left-handed arm out of the bullpen for us. OSA looks like a decent prospect in terms of how they evaluate him. You know, really great control, good movement, decent enough stuff. We kind of have broadly a similar view of him. I don't know that I want to give him $4.9 million. I'll offer him a minor league contract to at least hopefully keep the conversation going till we know more about him. But I would consider bringing him on board. We could use a lefty in the pen. But I don't know that I want to chase any of these players. And it seems crazy because I'm finally in a situation where I have some money to spend with the Pirates. And I don't really want to do it because I don't want to spend stupid money on an overpaid and possibly injury-prone or mediocre player. So one thing I have thought about is potentially putting more money into our draft budget. We should be getting a compensatory pick when Longoria signs, which will be positive. And typically there are a couple of players who fall in the draft every year because they're either looking for 10 or 12 million dollars, and that's, you know, $5, $6, $7, $8 million above the slot where they end up being drafted. And then there's also those players that are just listed as impossible to sign who might be looking for 13, 14, 15 million dollars a year. There is part of me that thinks I dump a ton of money into the draft budget for this upcoming season, particularly given that we've got the 26th ranked farm system at this point after picking in the mid to late 20s for most of the last decade. And then that would allow us to bring in our first round pick, which is going to be near the end of the first round, whatever supplemental pick we get when Longoria leaves. And then also potentially in the second or third round, pay somebody 10, 12, 15 million dollars way over slot because we've actually put that money into the draft budget. So that is an option also. I'm going to keep an eye on what's available in free agency. If somebody lingers out there, you know, particularly a frontline starter like a Longoria or a Machuca, maybe make a run at them. But it's weird. I think right now I'm actually leaning towards putting a big chunk of this money that we've got available for free agents into the draft budget to maybe get a better player in the second or third round that no one else wants to sign because they don't have the money to bring them on board. And then use the rest of the money to maybe take on some salary as we get closer to the trade deadline next season and we kind of identify where the holes in our roster are. I know that doesn't sound like a real exciting plan for free agency, but it's what I'm leaning to do right now as we kick things off here on November 21st. And Manny Renteria has gotten back to us, not surprisingly, not interested in a minor league deal. We're still a week or two out from knowing more about him. I do think he's probably a decent guy to consider. Looking for an average of $4.9 million a year. I don't want to give him that much, especially not knowing a ton about him, but I do want to kind of string him along a little bit. So for the time being, we'll offer him a minor league deal with a major league option. That's better than a pure minor league deal. Again, I'm not thinking he's going to go for it, but I'm trying to just string him along as much as possible till we get a scouting report back on him. Ooh. And apparently we've angered him so much that he doesn't want to continue negotiating with us, so we may have pushed things a little bit too far with Mr. Renteria. And after a nice 7-year run with the Pirates, Luis Longoria is gone. Fan interest almost crashed. Did get a supplemental first-round pick for him, so he must have gotten his money somewhere. Actually, only $24.6 million a year for 3 years, and then a player opt-out. So a potential 7-year deal worth $164 million. So it was even less than we could have signed him for. I don't feel bad about not making him an offer. He's a fragile pitcher. He now is 30 years old. I feel like we got the best years out of him, kept him healthy, and we'll move on to some younger and healthier pitchers. And fortunately, since fan interest was actually apparently well over 100, dipped down to just 98 with the loss of Longoria. So not even the worst thing in the world thus far in terms of putting fans into the seats for next season. And Manny Renteria did end up signing with the Padres. Looks like $4.36 million a year. So then a little more than that next year. So almost $9 million for 2 years. Our scouting accuracy, of course, is now high on him. Certainly a nice reliever. And as I said, I thought we could potentially use another left-handed arm. But I'm not going to freak out because we couldn't pay a middle reliever $4.5 million a year. But that does mean that it's increasingly unlikely that we're going to spend a big chunk of this money on free agents. And with the winter meeting starting today, before I forget about it, I'm going to put some money into the draft budget for next year. You can see we need around $10 million now with that supplemental pick. I am thinking about putting $22 million in for next year, which should allow us to sign both of our first-round picks with kind of players around slot, and then pay way over slot, maybe with the second round, or obviously we could do it pay over slot for our second first rounder and then kind of get a guy who is looking for a normal amount of money in the second round. But even if we bump things up there, that still gives us about $10 million for potential free agents. And I know that you don't necessarily need to have this money set aside specifically in your draft budget, depending on how generous your owner is. If you've got kind of money available through normal finances for free agents, sometimes you can leverage that to try to get draftees signed. But we are still dealing with penny pinching Robert Nutting. So I think just to be safe, I want to put that money into the draft budget to ensure that I've got it available next year if I want to go crazy and overpay slot on somebody. And I'm actually going to bump it up to $24 million, since I don't think we're going to be real active in free agency this year. Leaves us with a little over $9 million. So particularly once we get into next season, we'll be able to take on some contracts if we want. And there is a part of me that also wants to actually increase our scouting and development budgets a little bit, since our minor league system is as barren as it's ever been at this point. Bumping the scouting maybe allows us to find an extra better player in terms of international amateurs, and bumping up the development, hopefully, in conjunction with a real good coaching staff in the minors, will hopefully allow the talent that we do have to develop as effectively and quickly as possible. And we're getting close now to the Rule 5 draft. Maybe we'll be active there this offseason. I think there is more potential for this upcoming season than previous last few seasons, that we may have an opportunity to keep one or two players who we pick in a Rule 5. Since I feel like the last pitcher on our team and kind of a utility outfielder are areas that are right now definitely up for some competition in spring training. So I think Rule 5 could be interesting for us from that perspective. Taking a look at the Rule 5 eligible players, we don't have a ton of big-time prospects that are eligible this year, which is a little unfortunate because I'd rather have more talent in the system. And you can see we've only got 29 guys on the 40-man roster right now. But Jose Funes is a 24-year-old, kind of a replacement level looking pitcher. And Jesus Guzman, kind of similar, much better stuff, two really nice pitches, but his control looks like it's always going to be an issue. And we had him split last year between Double-A and Triple-A, and in 60 2/3 innings, he did strike out 105 batters, but he also walked 37 batters, and it's unlikely it's going to be better at the major league level. I think he's got a better chance of, just because of the great stuff and the two great pitches, of being useful. So given that we've got so much room on the 40-man, we'll put him there. But the cupboard is a bit bare in the minor leagues right now. And we're going to put a couple other guys onto the 40-man. I don't think we'd lose either of these players, and it's not the end of the world if we did. But Omar Clader is a third baseman who we picked in the second round 5 years ago at this point. Looks like he's probably a replacement-ish level player at the major league level. He can hit a little bit and he's got some speed. Did hit 309 and 302 the last couple years in Double-A. Injury-plagued season for him this past year when we thought we might be promoting him to Triple-A, and he's now fragile physically. I don't think he's a big-time prospect, but we'll keep him around just in case since we've got so much room. Similarly, Jeremy Cook, 22-year-old former 14th round pick, hasn't produced too much. Hit just 240 in high A ball last year, but does have the hitting profile of a decent fifth outfielder with a lot of speed and a pretty good base runner, knows how to bunt. Can also play multiple positions. Actually, as I'm looking at him, I'm talking myself out of putting him onto the team. If somebody wants to have him on in the majors next year, good luck to him. So we've made it to the Rule 5. Be interesting to see if we lose anybody. Best record in baseball, we're picking 30th, so not that I'm expecting there to be any revolutionary talent available, but we will see what's out there, because as I mentioned, I do feel like the back end of our bullpen and the back end of our everyday players, we've got some roster spots where there is going to be competition in spring training this year, which hasn't always been the case. So hopefully we can find someone who may help on the margin. And unfortunately, I'm seeing a whole lot of meh available in the Rule 5, which is probably more often than not what you're going to get. We'll see with the scouting. There is one player I'm very marginally interested in. We'll see what the scouting director recommends first, and he suggests we don't do anything, which I can't really disagree with. There's just really not a ton here. But I think just for the heck of it, I'm going to pick the 22-year-old outfielder, Edgar Velasquez. Pretty respectable defensively. Looks like he could be a acceptable fifth outfielder if his bat totally, develops. And he has some speed. He did hit 279 in A ball last year with 25 doubles, 12 triples, so he's got some extra base ability with that good gap power and the good speed. I would be shocked if he ends up making our 26-man roster, but I like him more than anyone else who's out there, and we've got room on the 40-man right now, so we're going to go ahead and pick him. And there was not a lot of action this year. You can see 7 total players picked. Dodgers picked 3 different players, but only 2 players were picked after we picked Edgar Velasquez. Some of the guys who were picked before us, certainly would have been interested in Jose Rico, right-handed reliever, but even though he's wrecked physically, is a guy that would not hurt to bring into camp. But he went with the first pick of the first round to the Dodgers, so we were never going to have a shot at him. And a couple more of our free agents are gone, Jose Calderon and Bobby Guzman. Calderon ended up getting over $12 million a year from the division rival Cardinals. He was okay with us and was pretty bad in a couple of big spots in the postseason, so good riddance to him. Bobby Guzman signs with the Mets for $6.6 million. As I mentioned, he had been a starter for us in the infield for well, actually, really only the first year that we had him. I felt like he had been with us for longer than 3 years. Shows how time flies when you're having fun, but he was really a full-time starter for us just 1 year and kind of more of a utility infielder for us the last couple of seasons, filling in at second base, third base most often for us. So another couple hits there, and you can see fan interest has dropped to a 92. We have locked in the higher $32 ticket price for next year. Probably going to take a few more hits to fan interest when we ultimately lose Bobby Gonzalez and the reliever Ethan Mingo, most likely. But I think we'll be in decent shape with the fans when next season begins. And as we get close to the end of 2047, we're getting close to the Hall of Fame voting. Kind of at the point where we've given up hope that Bobby Witt Jr., our former star with our Kansas City Royals playthrough, is going to be elected to the Hall of Fame, but we'll at least check in and find out how close he is or isn't from finally getting into the Hall of Fame. And we will now check in on those Hall of Fame voting results. And Bobby Witt Jr., once again, not elected in his 7th year. Nobody elected. Julio Rodriguez was the closest. We did have him back in Kansas City for half of a season. And I think that 2027, I want to say that was our first World Championship year in Kansas City. Yeah, he was the World Series MVP that year. And even he unable to get in. But taking a look at Bobby Witt Jr., 66.7%. Can see he's been very volatile. That's the third highest number he's ever had, and pretty close to the highest ever at 67.7%. But 7 tries, and Bobby Witt Jr., despite a career WAR of over 80, and 5 World Series championships, ton of Gold Gloves, ton of All-Star awards, Rookie of the Year, multiple playoff series MVP awards. Still not really all that close to Cooperstown. And with the calendar having flipped to 2048, take a quick look at who's available on the free agent market at this point. Are there any deals out there? The most interesting guys are probably 3 of our former players, and I don't think we chase any of them. But Jaquan Hinton, decent left-handed hitting first baseman. But with the fact that we now have Lupe Zelaya at first, we don't need him. Luis Flores, former first baseman who was hurt for the better part of his career with us. Also don't really need him with Zelaya around. Willie Medrano played third base for us for several seasons. Kind of your prototypical good third baseman from the 1980s with a 230, 240 average, a little over 20 homers, nice arm, competent defensively. But think we want to give the shot to the youngster Rivera. So I don't really feel like chasing after any of those. Ramon Herrera's another former guy from the Pirates, but certainly don't think we would bring him on as a fifth outfielder. And then Mike Augustini is a 42-year-old who we had briefly on the team at the end of the 2046 season. But don't see any real point in chasing after any of those guys. Taking a look at the pitchers, our old friend Bobby Gonzalez is still out there, and he is a lefty. You know, he's 12-6 with a 4.53 ERA for us last year, but can see his ERAs have been going up the last few years. His BABIPs have been going up. His WHIP's been going up. He's kind of a two-pitch pitcher at this point, which is tough for a starter. I mean, he does have a sinker and a slider, but they aren't very good. And he's an Iron Man, so he'll go out there every fifth day, but he's going to be 38 years old in May. I think I'd rather gamble on a youngster for a fifth starter and maybe see what we can find on the trade market down the line. And taking a look at the trade market, our former closer, Ricky Rios, who we moved on from because he's making $24 million a year as a closer, is probably not surprisingly on the trade market. If the Cubs would keep a ton of his contract, would certainly consider reuniting with him. I tend to think they probably won't do that, but we'll at least take a look. And they're not willing to give Rios away, which I was hoping but wasn't really expecting. But we can get him for Alex Sanabria, 22-year-old third baseman, hit .236 with 13 homers in Class A ball last year. Certainly looks like if he develops could be a decent bat. My concern is that although he's got a good arm, he's not as good defensively as anyone that I'd like to typically play at third base. And he's kind of a very borderline-ish bat for a DH, even if he develops completely. You know, he could have good home run power, but he's got no speed. He can't bunt. He's going to strike out a lot. Just not really my kind of player. So I am thinking about reuniting with Ricky Rios. If the Cubs will keep most of his contract, he would be a nice upgrade to our bullpen and very well could take over the closer role from Greg Gaylord, who is kind of the either unluckiest or the luckiest pitcher in history. He's a guy that when you look at his pitching stats, you can see he has, on occasion, been our closer. But he always ends up losing his job. But he's still won 2 Reliever of the Year awards back in 2020-44, and then this past season when we ended up taking him out of the closer role when we brought on the pitcher from Houston, who we've now moved on from also. So I feel a little bad that Gaylord could be losing the closer role again. But Rios would be a nice addition. I'd honestly like them to pay more than even 80% of his contract, though. Because right now, even 20% of that contract is a good chunk of the money that we have available. You can see it'll drop us down to just $1.5 million. I'd like to have a little more flexibility as we potentially head into the year to take on some contracts. Although I would love Rios, I'd love him better if the Cubs kept more of his contract. And we've got options to get him there. And we can get the Cubs to keep all of his contract. So we did even better than 80%. We've talked about Sanabria. He is obviously the cornerstone of the deal. He is a guy who could be a useful major league third baseman. I prefer a better defensive third baseman, and I also question whether he's going to fully develop as a hitter and how good he's going to be with just the lack of speed. You can see, as we talked about, he hit just 236 in A ball this past year. So he's not a huge prospect, but one of the things we've talked about a lot in this playthrough is my focus on having players with really good personalities in the minors to help mentor the few players that are the real prospects. And other teams want those kind of players too. We're giving up players, 4 of them, that are really not prospects, but they're all guys with good personalities. Jeffrey Top is a 37-year-old. He's wrecked physically, but just a veteran, good personality who we've had in AAA the last few years. John Lozada, 28-year-old second baseman. Again, a really good personality. They liked him. He's a guy who we've just kept around in rookie ball at the age of 28 because he does have that good personality and good influence on people. Edgar Quintero, 33-year-old. Again, spark plug personality, good work ethic, good adaptability. But we've had him in high A ball. Is just a guy to mentor others the last few years. And then Jaden Burgess, who is actually more of a real prospect, a guy who's only 22, who we picked in the 18th round, but a first baseman who's never going to be a major league hitter, but a great leader, good work ethic, well respected by his teammates, the kind of guy that other teams want to have in their minor league system also. So with the fact that we can basically get Rios for free next season, I think it's a great trade for us. A real prospect in Sanabria, and then 4 guys with great personalities who are going to help the Cubs minor league system. But typically when I'm drafting, by the time I get to the 14th, 15th round, I'm honestly just looking for good personalities. It's unlikely that any of those players are ever going to be major leaguers for me. So I always have an abundance of players with good personalities in my minor league system because those are the type of guys that I draft in the final rounds of the draft. And those are also the kind of guys that I sign as minor league free agents, typically a couple months from now when we get to March, maybe late February or March, and need to kind of start filling out some of those minor league rosters. So I always have plenty of those players around. And in this case, including 4 of them in a deal, was able to get the Cubs to keep the extra 20% of Rios' contract. So we've got just as much money to take on other contracts as we get into the upcoming season. And we've added a guy who's probably the most talented arm in our bullpen. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Fans excited to have Rios back on board, so that's also positive. Nice 5-point boost to fan interest from the 1 year reuniting with Ricky Rios. So although we still haven't signed a free agent, we actually have done something to improve our roster for next year and hopefully help get the Pirates back into the playoffs for what would be a 8th consecutive playoff appearance if we're able to get the job done. And another departure, Ethan Mingo, our longtime reliever, ended up not signing for all that much money. His arbitration number was over $7 million. Right-hander ended up signing for less than $3 million. So we had talked in our last episode about how we were glad we moved on from him when we saw what he was looking for as a free agent. So the fans not pleased that Mingo is gone, and actually that took away a lot of the boost that we got from bringing on Rios. But Rios is certainly a better pitcher than Ethan Mingo. So for next year at least, I feel, or I guess it's this year at this point, since it is now 2048 for this upcoming season, I think we're still in a better position with Rios on board than Mingo. And the preseason is about to begin tomorrow, and spring training will begin about a month after that. So we'll focus on what we think we need to do to get ready for the upcoming season in our next episode when we go through the preseason and spring training, most likely bringing on some players to bolster some of these minor league rosters. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to find someone who can help us at the major league level. We'll keep an eye on the trade market, and we'll keep an eye on what's going on in terms of free agency. But I tend to think that it's going to be more likely May, June, or July of this year that we'll be making a trade to hopefully use a little bit of that money that we've saved up. And then also looking forward to July and the fact that we have dumped a ton of money into our draft budget this year, so we can go way over slot for a few people. And typically there are always a couple players who are extremely difficult or impossible to sign who fall to the second, third, fourth round each year. So maybe we'll be able to find a first round talent in the second or third round, pay him a lot more than anybody else would, and hopefully bolster the minor league system a bit. So it's been a weird offseason. First offseason I can ever remember where we have not signed anyone through free agency. As I said, presumably we'll be bringing on some minor league free agents, and we'll continue to see if we can go bargain hunting with the players that are out there, but kind of in a position where I think we're still going to be a playoff team this coming year, and I think we can still be a playoff team even going with a bit of the youth movement and some of the young players that we mentioned, like Rivera and Smith, having much more significant roles in the upcoming 2048 season. So we'll find out what our final preparations during the spring are in our next episode. Until then, thank you so much for watching. If you've got thoughts on what we've done, would love to hear them down below, and hope you have a great day.